Hello and welcome to another Spec3 informational video. So today we're going to talk about what required safety equipment there is to race with the National Autosport Association. So what we're going to talk about today is really specific to Spec3. There are some parts that we don't allow that mean that there are additional safety requirements you don't have to follow that someone in the German Touring Series or Super Touring or something like that may have to abide by. So starting at the back of the car, we'll talk about a rain light. So this is not required by most NASA regions, however, it is becoming more popular. And a rain light is specified as a rear-facing light that is FIA approved, and normally these will blink at 4 hertz, so 4 flashes per second. And the most common way that they need to be wired up is that they will flash constantly, and then when you press the brake, they go solid. Of course, every race car needs to have a proper roll cage. If you're interested in more information about that, we have a separate video called How to Build a NASA Spec3 Legal Roll Cage, where we go into great detail on all of that. So the next thing that we'll talk about on the list of required safety items for a NASA race car is going to be a fire suppression system. So consult the NASA CCR to look at exactly what SFI and FIA rating is required. But the general idea is it has to be a pressurized bottle with some kind of extinguishing material inside of it. And you'll mount it in your car. This is actually installed incorrectly, and I will be changing it. Most fire bottle manufacturers require that they be mounted sideways so that if you get into an incident hitting a wall, it doesn't slide out. But you'll connect it up to fire poles. So this is a cable that runs into the bottle, and when you pull this either here or over on the driver's side, should be reachable by the driver. It will pull this, it'll lock the bottle on, and then the extinguishing material will go through the lines that you run, and they should point at the driver and into the engine bay at a minimum. Some people will also put them into the fuel tank, on the top of the fuel tank, but that really doesn't do much. If the gasoline fuel tank is on fire, putting some extinguishing material on it's not really going to save you much. Up front, you will see that we also have the fire nozzles pointed at the fuel rail and also at the exhaust manifold. It's hard to see, but there is a nozzle right here. So the reason you do that is obviously this is going to be the largest place of a fire if fuel is leaking, but also if you leak fuel or oil or some other thing on the exhaust manifold, this is the second most likely place for a fire to start. So these bottles actually have 2 different dates to pay attention to. So one will be the date of manufacture, and mine is actually kind of rubbed out. But each bottle is good for 10 years. So you can keep servicing it as long as the bottle is less than 10 years old. And then the other thing is going to be the service date. So you have to service these every 2 years. Some other SFI, FIA rated bottles may have different requirements for service, but usually it's 2 years. So you can send it off to a place like OG Racing and they'll refill the bottle, recertify it, put new rings and things like that on it. Wherever you have a fire pole, you need to also have an extinguisher sticker. So you can see here an emergency services person would see the sticker, they'll know that the pole is right there and they can pull it remotely. One should be accessible from outside the car, and at least one should be accessible from inside the car when you're belted in, because if you get into an accident, you can't get out of the car, you want to be able to pull the fire pole to buy yourself some time. So while we're over here, we'll talk about an electrical kill switch. So the reason you want this is if you get into an accident and something happens, you're able to shut the car off. So maybe it gets stuck in gear and it wants to keep moving, or maybe the fuel pumps are still on and they're pumping gas out and it's leaking everywhere, or anything like that. You want to be able to flip that switch. So ideally, it's reachable to the driver, and that's actually in the NASA Spec3 rules that we want it to be reachable. And also ideally, it should be reachable outside the car. So this is the easiest place to put it on E36 because you just cut the 2 wires that are coming from the battery up to the front in half and put the switch there. But something that I'll be adding, and is a good idea, is to put another pull cable attached to the switch so that you can run it up to the outside of the car and pull it and also turn the car off that way. A sticker is also required for the kill switch location. So this is what it looks like. If you have an EV, an electric vehicle, there are also additional requirements for the stickers you have they'll have a special EV sticker that let the emergency personnel know that your car is different, not to cut into it, and that it likely needs to have one of those submersion tanks to drop the whole car in, because EVs will continue to burn. Another item that I would consider a safety item is having a camera. So if you ever do get into an incident on track, if you don't have footage that exonerates you, you will have a much higher chance of being found at fault. Some NASA regions will actually fine people for not having at least one forward-facing camera. So I run one forward-facing camera, I run a dash cam in the back, and then I also will have a backup forward-facing camera that I might be live streaming. So the more angles, the better. The camera should be able to see all of your inputs as well as outside the car, because you want to be able to review if you're turning left and right or braking, especially if there's some kind of on-track incident. So now talking about seats. There are a couple different regulations and certifications for seats. You can read in the NASA CCR to see what they are. But the general gist is you need to have a compliant, legal seat that holds you in place, and there are a loose definition of kind of what a racing seat is defined as, but they won't have springs in them, they won't have a tubular construction, they'll either be carbon fiber or fiberglass or some other composite, and it's a single seat. Some seats, like the aluminum Ultra Shield seats that are very popular in Miatas and in muscle cars and things like that, they don't have a FIA rating that allows them to be used without a seat back brace, so it's required. However, if your seat is at least a FIA 8855-1999 seat, it can be used for a set amount of time without a seat back brace. And then there are also newer FIA regulations that last even longer without a seat back brace. You also have to have appropriate belts. So these are usually going to be SFI or FIA rated belts, and they cannot be expired. As you can see here, there's an official tag, and then there is a expiration date on there. They can't be expired. And if they're ever in a wreck in your car while you're racing, the tech shed people will usually come over and they will cut your belts then, because they're one-time use. If they get stretched during an incident, they're no good. These need to be mounted per the manufacturer instructions, which usually are going to require they be mounted to the seat mounts, or maybe with sandwich plates through the chassis, or in some factory bolt holes that are rated sufficiently for the forces. Each manufacturer has a different way of installing them as well. Some manufacturers will require that they be crossed behind the seat. Some of them allow them to be straight on. There's a maximum angle that you're allowed to have here going through the shoulder holes, and they must meet your shoulders at the appropriate angle. So you have to consult the user manual for your belts. So what you can see here is I have a containment seat, which means that it has these wings that will hold your head in place in an accident. If you don't have a containment seat and you want to race, you must have a center net. So a center net goes in and will connect to the front of your roll cage. And the purpose of that is to hold your hands in when you roll, and also it keeps the seat centered. So if you hit something side to side, it'll keep your head contained, and it'll also stabilize the seat laterally, which is really nice. And that's why I run one even though I don't need to, because I have a containment seat. The BMW Club of America does require a center net regardless of a containment seat or not. Over on the driver's side, we'll talk about some other things. So first thing we'll mention is a window net. So if you haven't seen the pattern so far, everything that's installed in my car is technically legal, but not the best interpretation of it. So your window net should fill at least 50% of your window opening. Mine barely does. So they do make window nets that have an angle. Those are nice. Or you can just have your cage fabricator put the mounting points a little bit more forward than they did mine, because half of it's behind the seat. But the window net is there to keep things outside the car from coming in, hitting you in the face, and to keep your arms and head from going out the window in a rollover. And depending on where it's at, it also can stabilize the seat side to side. So the rules for NASA were just updated. So as long as you have the properly rated SFI window net, they actually don't expire anymore as of 2024 in NASA. They just have to be in good condition. Here you can see the other fire pole. And you can see how I can reach my kill switch from the driver's seat, which is very useful. And you'll see here that I have the fire nozzles pointed at me, and these are usually tied in, but they're pointed at me so that I am receiving the most of the fire suppression to buy myself time to get out of the car. You'll also see that I have a quick release steering wheel. You could sort of count this as a safety item, but it allows me to get out of the car much more quickly. So you can buy a racing steering wheel and bolt it directly on. You can also weld a hub on, which I do not recommend. But for the E36, there are tons of really great options for bolt-on hub adapters and also bolt-on quick release adapters. So this slides on and then clicks into place. On a race car, your steering lock also has to be removed. On an E36, you can actually just drill a hole in the bottom of the ignition cylinder and then pull a spring out with a pair of needle nose pliers, and that's enough to disable the lock. You also have to have at least one tow hook on a race car. So I have one here in the back. It's a folding style. This is not a great idea because you can see it sticks out past the bumper, which means it can punch a hole in the bumper. On the front, I have a BMW Motorsport style strap, and you can see mine is actually busted from being towed before, but these are much better because they won't damage cars when you give them a lub tap or a bump draft. Race cars are also not allowed to use glycol-based antifreeze. You have to run just water. You can use a surfactant like water wetter, but glycol is very slippery, so if you start leaking on the track or you overheat, get into a wreck, it'll ruin the racetrack. It'll make it extremely slippery and a hazard for other cars. So all race cars have to have just water unless the region director allows you to have a certain mix, like if it's going to be really cold out. So maybe at the March event, February event, they'll allow some antifreeze. So beyond the items that we discussed here on the car, you will also require a properly rated helmet, a balaclava if you have facial hair, a properly rated suit, and if that suit does not have enough layers or high enough rating, you will also need fire retardant underwear, meaning shirt and pants. You'll also need fire retardant properly rated socks and also fire retardant shoes. You'll also need fire retardant gloves. Of course, as always, please consult the NASA CCR. There are some things that we did not cover. There are some types of vehicles that you can build that have additional requirements, such as there are rules on fuel cells in the car, relocated batteries. There are rules about having oil lines running through the cabin. If you have polycarbonate front and rear windows, or additional requirements there. If you have a sunroof, you have to install sunroof clips. The list goes on and on. So this list is good for a spec BMW race car. There's usually not anything else that you're going to need. But if you do anything beyond that, you should definitely consult the NASA CCR in depth and look through all the safety regulations.